We're just a couple days away from the historic UFC White House event, and one of the things that people were talking about as this card was being made is some of the matchmaking and how there's some fights that a lot of people feel like they already know who's going to win, right? There's a lot of betting favorites on this card. If we do a quick glance here, Ilia Topuria, 4-1 favorite. You got Sean O'Malley, almost a 4-1 favorite over Zahabi. Josh Hokett's a big favorite. Bo Nickal's a pretty decent favorite. There's a few fights here like Pereira and Gane and obviously Lopez and Garcia that are a bit closer. But one of the things I don't see a lot of people talking about is what happens if these betting favorites don't end up winning their fights. So that's what I'm going to talk about in today's video, kind of the context of what would happen if some of these fighters end up losing. And we'll start right at the main event between Ilia Topuria and Justin Gaethje. So obviously a ton on the line here for Topuria. The fight that everyone wanted was Ilia Topuria and Arman Tsarukyan. Obviously we know all the issues with Arman and him not being able to get the title shot. You hope that he's going to get the winner of this fight. And Justin Gaethje is going to make things interesting with the fact that it appears it's going to be the last fight for him. Seems like retirement's on the horizon, but he's got a huge task here in the fact that he's a plus 425 favorite. But a couple interesting things that I think are worth noting going into this fight, and also, what would happen if Gaethje does end up pulling this off. But first, let's talk about something a bit unusual here from Topuria. So one of the things I noticed sort of going into this fight was some of the back and forth. There is a bit of trash talk between them. And one of the things that stood out, and you read the quote here, Ilia Topuria sends a violent threat to idiot Justin Gaethje before the White House over ex-wife comments. Now, if you hear some of Gaethje's talk sort of going into the fight, it doesn't seem like he addresses his ex-wife. This almost seems like something that Ilia Topuria is kind of pulling out of nowhere and trying to make it a thing. And I found that a bit surprising. And this reminds me a bit, using an old sort of example here, of when Ronda Rousey was extremely mad at Holly Holm going into their fight. Remember, she got in her face and it was a huge thing. And she's like, I'll never forget what you said. I think it was about her family or something, but I'm getting similar vibes here. And that's not a good thing, obviously, because you remember Ronda Rousey was a big favorite going into the fight with Holly Holm. Same thing here with Ilia Topuria. Kind of what I'm meaning is, like, we haven't really seen Topuria act like this going into a fight with Gaethje. Now, saying that, this is an extremely tough mental fighter. This is the same fighter here in Ilia Topuria who had a victory party before his fight against Charles Oliveira after defeating him. But I think it's something worth noting going into this fight that it is something a bit different, and I do worry a little bit about that. The other thing I worry about in this fight as well is the layoff. Ilia Topuria has not fought since the Oliveira fight back in June of 2025. So just close to a year was the last time he fought. That's a pretty long layoff coming into this fight. So again, another thing that I think could make things a bit interesting is the time off going to be, a factor in this fight. The other thing is, obviously, Topuria hasn't lost. He's got a huge legacy on the line here. This is a fight he's supposed to win, and fighting on the, arguably the most historic card in UFC history on the White House, that's a lot of pressure to deal with. Now, I have no doubt Topuria can handle the pressure and go out there and perform well, and I am expecting him to win. But what if he doesn't win? Let's live in a world right now where Justin Gaethje ends up winning this fight, whether he knocks him out. I mean, that would be crazy. Gaethje's certainly capable of it. He's got knockout power. Or, let's say he wins the decision and maybe, the judging's bad, or I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of options here, especially if Topuria does not get him out early. But if Ilia Topuria loses this fight, so many things will happen as a result of this. Number one, this really ruins a lot of the UFC's plans. If Gaethje ends up winning, then you would have to do Gaethje and Arman. That's not really a big fight. The big fight right now is Topuria and Tsarukyan. Obviously, the bigger fight is Islam and Topuria. That's a whole different story. But Topuria losing would really lose a lot of luster here. Of course, he won the featherweight title. He's won the lightweight title. I mean, this is a fighter that wants to get as many accomplishments as he can in his career and then bounce. And that's not going to happen, or that could potentially prolong his career if he ends up losing here. So I think a loss here for Topuria would really hurt his legacy. Obviously, you can't take away the fact that he has won 2 belts, but him losing to a fighter like Gaethje, it would go down as one of the biggest upsets in UFC history, especially based off the betting odds, especially based after how Gaethje looked in his last fight. He did win against Paddy Pimblett, but it was not a flawless performance by any means, and it's something to consider. And then also you got the fact that Gaethje, we're just a couple fights removed from him getting knocked out by Max Holloway, 2 fights removed since then. So yeah, a loss for Topuria would be devastating, and I think really would hurt his legacy here. So something to keep in mind going into this fight. Pereira and Gane, I don't think the stakes are as big because, again, the odds are fairly close. I mean, it's almost a pick 'em in this one. Pereira loses. Does that really hurt his legacy that much? I don't think so. He's already won 2 belts. Defended those belts as well, right? Or I can't remember if he defended middleweight or not, but either way, he's won 2 belts and, he's looked good. So I'm going to kind of skip over this fight because I don't think, even if Gane loses, I don't think it's a terrible thing. He's already been an interim champ before. We'll skip that fight. Let's go to O'Malley and Zahabi. This is another interesting one. And one thing I do find a bit interesting, and maybe I'm wrong here, guys, you let me know. I haven't seen a lot of Sean O'Malley this week, and I actually think that's a good thing. You know, typically when we've seen O'Malley do a lot of media or be out there a lot, it hasn't really gone his way in fights. And, you know, the fact that he's kind of, you know, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong about this, let me know. Maybe I haven't seen the same stuff you guys are. I feel like he's dialed in, and I think that's a good thing. Now, O'Malley, you can see a minus 420 favorite. One thing that I think is worth noting in this fight is Aiemann Zahabi, you know, hasn't lost in 7 fights, and he's only been finished 1 time, and that was way back in 2017. So, you know, keep that in mind that if O'Malley can't finish this fight, it could get interesting. Aimann's been in a lot of close fights, most notably the Aldo fight. That was one that people thought could have gone the other way. Even the Pedro Munoz fight was close. Marlon Chito Vera was close. He has a way of, you know, stifling his opponents a bit and winning these decisions. So I think it's possible that Zahabi could win this fight. I'm still picking O'Malley, obviously, but something to consider here. If O'Malley loses this fight, where does he go from here? That's a really big question. Obviously, he's coming off the win over Song Yadong, but would he stick around in the weight class? That would be 3 losses in his last 4 fights, and granted, 2 of those are against a top-level fighter here in Merab, but this is a fight he's supposed to win. Losing to a 38-year-old who, you know, let's be honest, a lot of people aren't picking, would be very devastating to the O'Malley brand. Does he end up moving? Would he move up to featherweight? Does he stick around? Again, O'Malley's not that old, but he's also 31. So it's like, where would he go? I think a loss here for O'Malley would really hurt his stock, and we'd really have to figure out what the future's looking like. And O'Malley's another guy, it seems, that doesn't want to be in the sport that much longer. That could delay things as well if he ends up losing, because a lot of fighters don't want to go out the way that O'Malley could potentially go out here. And I think, again, Aiemann, very good game plan, going to have George St. Pierre in his corner. It could be interesting here as far as, you know, how this one goes. So a loss for O'Malley would really hurt his career here, and would be pretty devastating, honestly. So that's something to consider. And then the other fight I look at on this one, I mean, we'll go through a couple. Mauricio Ruffy and Chandler, another fight where you've got a big favorite. Actually, let's back this up a little bit. Let's go Lewis and Holkett. Honestly, if Josh Holkett loses this fight, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Heavyweight's a mess right now. We've obviously got your top contenders at the top here, but I honestly think if somehow Josh Holkett lost this fight, he's 28. That's really young for heavyweight. Most heavyweights you see are in their mid-30s. So I don't think it matters as much here for Holkett if he loses. So yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I think if he loses, not a big deal. And we've already got the built-in excuse of, well, he fought too close to the Blades fight. So I don't think that's as big of a deal. We're going to skip over that one. Let's go to Ruffy and Chandler. Would be very devastating for Ruffy, but he's lost before, right? And we're just 2 fights removed from him losing, right? The loss to Benoit Saint-Denis was 2 fights ago. So it would still be a tough one. And obviously, again, I don't know what the future of Michael Chandler is. He's 40. How much is the UFC really going to get out of him at this point? I don't think it would be that big of a deal there. But he is, I believe he's the biggest betting favorite on this card. Ruffy is. He's minus 650. It would be tough. And then it's like, you know, you're 29. That's still enough time to kind of figure things out here. But this is another fight that I think, to me, is the most obvious fight on the card. He should go out there and finish Michael Chandler. If he doesn't, then yeah, that's going to be a huge loss for him, and really got to figure out where his career is going to go from here, because there's no excuses here. He's had the full camp. He switched things up training with Volk. He should win this. Chandler, though, we know how dangerous he is in the first round, and we did see Benoit Saint-Denis have success against Ruffy, being the aggressor. So certainly possible Chandler could pull this off. I do think Ruffy wins this one, but something to consider how this would impact his career if he ends up losing this fight. But here's another interesting one here. Bo Nickal and Kyle Dawkins. If you guys have watched my preview show going into this, I don't think it's a slam dunk Bo Nickal wins this fight. I am picking him by decision. But what's the thing we've seen with Kyle Dawkins, especially in that Michel Pereira fight? He can be the aggressor. And we saw that in a fight against Michel Pereira, where he was a big underdog and he came through and got the first round finish. Now, Michel Pereira does not have great fight IQ. We saw this in many fights, including the one against Tristan Connolly, which it's like, how did you lose against a featherweight? But I think you know, this new Kyle Dawkins that we're seeing in the UFC, a more refined version, he's very dangerous. And I see a lot of people writing Kyle off. I don't see a lot of people picking him. Obviously, Nickal has the advantage in the wrestling, but what's one thing we saw with Bo Nickal against Reiner de Ritter? He doesn't like getting hit. It was pretty obvious. He didn't know how to react when de Ritter was throwing those bombs at him. And Kyle certainly got some stand-up. He's obviously known more for his ground game, which is also going to be a good threat here. He's got 12 wins by submission. But I think Kyle's stand-ups come a long way too. And it's not like he's way older than Bo Nickal. He's 3 years older. Plus 270 underdog. I think there's worth a shot here. Again, I am picking Nickal, but I think Dawkins has got a shot potentially to win this. This is one of those underdogs I look at on this card and think Kyle Dawkins could potentially pull it off. Now, a loss for Bo Nickal. Let's talk about that. We know the story here with Bo Nickal in the UFC. They have given him kid gloves on his way up. Look at this matchmaking here. Jamie Pickett retired shortly after that fight. Val Woodburn was out of the UFC. I don't think Val Woodburn won a single UFC fight. Did he not? And he was fighting at welterweight after too. So Val Woodburn, yeah, had 2 fights, Bo Nickal, Oban Elliott, and then he was out of the UFC. So that doesn't age too well. Cody Brundage has been barely holding on to a job in the UFC. And yes, Nickal got the win there. But again, wonder about the strength of schedule there. Paul Craig retired shortly after this fight. And he couldn't finish him. And remember, the whole excuse from Nickal was, oh, I didn't want to go to the ground with how dangerous Paul Craig is. Paul Craig hadn't had a submission in a while. I think this was a fight that he could have finished, and I think it actually showed that Bo maybe doesn't have that same killer instinct. We saw the DeRitter loss. Again, total mismatch. Let's go look at the stats in that one, actually. You want to go look at the stats in that fight. That was all RDR in that one. What was the outlanding shots here? Bo Nickal, look at this, 22-8. Total blowout here. Nickal did get one takedown in the fight, but DeRitter just totally dominated him in the stand-up. It was a complete beatdown there. So I'm not saying Kyle Daukaus is going to do what DeRitter did, but it's a similar style matchup in the sense that Daukaus is a bit of a threat there. But yeah, a loss for Nickal. Where would he go from here? There is the argument of him potentially moving down to welterweight, right? There's some talk about, maybe he is too small for the weight class. He's 6'1", but it would be a tough spot because then that would be 2 losses in his last 3 fights. He's 30. Again, he hasn't been competing that long in MMA. Obviously, he's been a wrestler for a while, but this would be devastating to Bo Nickal in his career as far as where he wants to go. I almost put it in a similar spot to where Ruffy is. Ruffy loses on the weekend, same sort of thing. O'Malley's a bit different. He's won a title. He's obviously accomplished a lot, but yeah, a loss here for Nickal. I don't want to say it's career ending, but it would be very, very tough for him to find any sort of success after this. Again, I know he's 30 and not that old, but it's tough to say. And again, his last win where people thought, oh, Bo Nickal's back, was against Rodolfo Vieira, who's pushing 40, 36, maybe not pushing 40, but he's mid-30s. And he hasn't done so well since the loss to Nickal. He lost to Eric McConaughey in the fight after. So this is another fight where just be careful if you're on the Nickal side here. So again, I think a loss for Nickal could potentially derail his career as far as his success in the UFC. Because what are the expectations for Nickal? Especially prior to RDR, the expectation was this could be the future UFC champion. He's got a great wrestling background. He's an American, right? Like there was a lot of hype behind that. If he loses this, dare I say, a lot of his hype would be gone, I think. So, and again, one other thing I'll point out just before we're wrapping things up in this video. And again, Diego Lopez, Steve Garcia, a loss for Lopez would be pretty tough. Again, he's got the 2 losses to Volk. That would be 3 straight losses. Oh no, you had the John Silva win in between there. I forgot about that. You lose twice to Volk, you lose to Garcia. It would be tough. And featherweight is kind of getting a bit crowded now. Obviously, we saw Sterling win his fight. John Silva obviously won his last fight too, so he's, a bit ahead. Lopez is not, I think, in a terrible spot. There's always the thought of him maybe moving up. I don't know. But yeah, I don't think that again, this is fairly even, so I don't think it's as devastating as some of these biggest betting favorites. But yeah, one more thing I wanted to mention before we get out of here. A lot of the matchmaking on this card was by design. There's a reason Topuria is fighting Gaethje and them not rushing to do the Arman fight. They want highlights. Let's be honest here. I think the UFC also wants some of these American guys to win as well. Again, I look at the O'Malley and Zahabi matchmaking. Let's just call it like it is. If Sean O'Malley was fighting Corey Sandhagen or fighting Umar, those fights would be tougher than Amin Zahabi, right? They're younger. They've looked a little bit more impressive. I think it was by design that O'Malley's fighting Zahabi because they'll sell it as a 7-fight win streak. But I think stylistically, this is a very good fight for O'Malley because he's got knockout power. Amin Zahabi gets hit a lot. I think he's got a low striking defense. I think it's like 55%, or actually might even be lower. Let me even check that there. So I think the matchmaking was done for a reason here. And I'm not saying the UFC is fixing fights or anything. Actually, striking defense is better. It's at 69. Okay. For some reason, I thought it was lower, but yeah, I just think that Zahabi's kind of been, squeaking through these fights. O'Malley, has looked a little bit better in my opinion here. So like I said, I think some of these fights were set up by design. It's for Topuria to get a nice highlight reel finish. It's for O'Malley to get a nice highlight reel finish. Ruffy, same thing. Nickal, I think they believe can beat Kyle Daukaus, but again, I do wonder about the matchmaking there. So kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at this card. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about kind of what could happen if some of these big favorites lose and where their careers would go from here, just as kind of a thought process. Just for the record, you guys know my picks already. I'm going Lopez, Nickal, Ruffy, Hokit, O'Malley, Pereira, Topuria. We'll see how the card goes. But I'm excited, guys. It's going to be a fun one on Sunday. But let me know in the comments what you think a loss for some of these big favorites would do. That's kind of what I wanted to discuss in today's video. Do you think my points are fair? Do you think, maybe I'm being too harsh? Do you think that they might be okay if they lose? I think, again, the guys like Topuria, O'Malley, Ruffy, they would be pretty detrimental to their career if they lose these fights, especially with the fact they're such big betting favorites. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. Appreciate you watching this video. I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks so much for watching.